Hey everybody, this is our facilitation by Allison Hinson and Ariel Long, and we did our facilitation over a multicultural educational perspective on serving the culturally diverse gifted by Catano, and this was a 1991 article. The topics that we're going to be talking about, the major things that are concerning multicultural gifted students are research implications, the frameworks that affect identification and practice, and curriculum. So as far as research goes, research literature on multicultural education, there's not a ton of it, and there's even less on culturally diverse gifted students. A lot of past research is on diversity between groups, and that's really too simplistic. There's really even more diversity within different groups. There's a lot of complex societal and ecological things that we need to consider. So within group variability is one of the best strategies for figuring out the differences between groups. And because of these within group differences, it can be really hard to figure out the best strategies. You know, if we're just looking at one group of people and there's so many differences between that one group, it's really difficult to structure that in your classroom to meet all of those needs. So using methods that the culture naturally uses can be helpful. For example, if you're teaching an American Indian or a Native American student and their culture really values oral tradition, if you use oral tradition in your classroom, that's obviously going to be helpful for that student. Now, it's important to notice that the research on multicultural gifted students, or multicultural students, excuse me, a lot of those are not gifted studies, but using culturally relevant practices is a great way for any teacher or student to begin a multicultural classroom. They don't have to be gifted. So, like it says right here on the slide, there's very little research on culturally diverse gifted students. Of that, within group differences, but educators must continually create instructional practices that address these differences. So, there's a lot of different talk in this article about different philosophical frameworks, and there's debate over the best philosophical framework for gifted culturally diverse students. And right here we're looking at assimilationist versus pluralist. So for assimilationist, that idea is that they relinquish their original culture by it's a relinquishment of original culture by members of these diverse ethnic groups, and you absorb those members into the core culture. So what you're doing is changing the student to fit the school. Unfortunately, that's where a lot of our schools are right now. But on the other hand, pluralist, you're supporting the diverse ethnic group retention of the original culture, and you're advancing the society as a whole. So you're changing the school to meet the needs of the student, which is obviously much more along the lines of some of the things that we've talked about in our classes. Some other of the frameworks that are discussed in this article. So a lot of states say that they promote multiculturalism, but their policies don't always actually do what they say that they're doing. Most people who are the directors of these state programs claim to support one of these two perspectives. So they're either going to be supporting equality of treatment or individualization. In equality of treatment, they're not differentiating the identification or the services for what they call disadvantaged students, and disadvantaged includes culturally diverse students. So they don't want to treat them any differently. They're going to treat all of the students exactly the same. In individualization, the differentiation is specialized so that each student gets exactly what they need. So some say that both of these are being ignored, and that's what causes underrepresentation in gifted programs. But usually they fall along one of those two. So let's see here. The question up here at the top of this screen says, can schools promote pluralism and academic achievement while maintaining their culture? So we talked about pluralism. and that's having all of those cultures be valued. So there's two obstacles in promoting pluralism and academic achievement and maintaining the culture at the same time. The first obstacle is conflicting cultural values. So within group differences in cultures, they exist everywhere, within friend groups, we've talked about how those within group differences are just massive. And even, friend groups, you might have a same cultural friend group, and some students value academic achievement, some don't. So that can be hard when maintaining that school culture. Also, you need to have reasonable expectations on your teachers. So your teacher is expected to, in this circumstance, be prepared to teach history and culture of many different ethnic groups. And I don't know about y'all, but we need to know a lot of things. And so that's a huge expectation to have on the teachers. So ideally, the goal is cultural flexibility. Also, they use in this article another term called biculturalism. So it's kind of similar to being bilingual. You learn this other culture and you become fluent in that other culture, but you don't lose the first culture. You become fluent in both. So there's a large amount of underrepresentation of culturally diverse students in gifted programs. We've talked about that before. And there's a question of if alternate identification methods would be more accurate. And so we have agreed in other weeks of this class that multiple measures should be used. We know that multiple measures should be used, but most states still use standardized tests. So looking at this slide right here, are these forms of identifying gifted students equitable to all students and to those from culturally diverse backgrounds? Those standardized tests, they're not. We have language barriers. We have different forms of creative expression and self-expression. So a lot of people have suggested cultural strengths of ethnic groups as a basis for these non-biased assessments. A lot of cultures have similar strengths and abilities, but they express them in different ways. And so that would be a good place to start as far as a non-biased assessment and identification process. And the article says that because the states aren't doing this, they're kind of practicing an assimilationist philosophy, which, if you remember, assimilationist versus the pluralist assimilationist would not necessarily be ideal. So next, the article goes on to talk about equity versus elitism. And there's a struggle within a lot of ethnic communities because of the perceptions of equity and elitism. There's the idea that if the community is valued over the individual in some cultural groups, then those special services to gifted students would create tension between the community and the student because they're viewing that that service as elitist. And the goal here would be to raise the whole school achievement in many people's eyes, but that seems more important than raising the participation of culturally diverse students in those gifted programs. And so right here you've got a picture of two people doing tug of war. You're kind of trying to pull on what's more important for the school. Is the whole school achievement more important, or are these culturally diverse students more important? So several states are trying things like higher level thinking skills and learner-centered approaches, but enriched regular ed classrooms really can't substitute the efforts to identify and serve those culturally diverse students that are gifted. You can't just say, oh, well, all of our classrooms are getting better, so that's better for all of our students. You really do need to take into account the needs of those gifted students. So once underachieving culturally diverse gifted students are identified, there's a question of should we focus on intervention or empowerment? In the intervention mindset, these students have deficits that are relative to the mainstream gifted students. These gifted students can't do things as well as other gifted students, basically. And so they're trying to turn them into those other mainstream gifted students. And that's an assimilationist view. As far as empowerment, we should be encouraging those students through their strengths that they already have to become better versions of themselves. And that would be the pluralist view. Some ideas to promote that school empowerment that the article includes. The schools could help parents acquire skills for enhancing children's ethnic pride. They could foster close partnerships between the schools and parents, and they could support the teaching of native languages. So those could all be things that could be done. The next section of the article talks about peer collaborative learning for culturally diverse gifted students, and they give some kind of pros and cons for reasons why we should or should not use peer collaborative learning for these students. So some pros, some good things, we've got greater engagement, higher academic achievement, higher self-esteem. These students can create diverse friendships. They have the ability to work cooperatively. But the cons, there's not a lot of research done with peer collaborative learning with gifted students. And if you're using this peer collaborative learning, you have a less class time that could lead to less opportunities for these students who learn much quicker. They don't have the time to do accelerated learning or to do independent projects that they would do if they were working on their own. Most people, though, agree that it is a good opportunity for students to practice peer collaborative learning because it's an opportunity to kind of demonstrate the democratic process that they'll see in our society as a whole. So some curricular issues that we have kind of depend on the people designing the curriculum and their views. So if the people designing the curriculum are of the assimilationist perspective, then that curriculum is going to require a mastery of mainstream curriculum and higher level and creative thinking skills so that they can be leaders in society. And the goal of that curriculum would be to have these culturally diverse gifted students have the same outcome and programs as the mainstream gifted students. And that outcome that they're trying to have would be an exceptional educational attainment. Sounds good, but it's kind of forcing everybody into that same bubble. As far as the pluralist views, if the people designing the curriculum are of the pluralist perspective, then the idea is to empower all of the gifted children to work towards social justice, and the goal would be individual academic achievement and individual and group advocacy skills. And it goes on in the article to kind of talk about some things that would be included in an assimilationist curriculum and things that would be included in a pluralist curriculum. And if you're interested in that, definitely check that out in the article. But in order to save time, we're going to skip over that in the presentation. So it's important to know that these multicultural content, multicultural curriculum is an additive thing. Many gifted students participate in learning activities outside of school. There's a concern about whether or not if you include all of this multicultural education, you'll be able to include everything that you're required to include. This is not an instead of, this is in addition to. Also, multicultural education can benefit all gifted students, not just those of diverse backgrounds. Any gifted student needs to know how to work with others to understand others. So this multicultural education is not just for those culturally diverse students. Also, multicultural curriculum can create an awareness of equity issues like social class, religion, gender, sexual preference. The goal of this is not to produce advocates for pluralistic concerns. It's to produce citizens who recognize social injustice and work toward creation of a more equitable society. So as teachers, how we can support this, we can encourage exploration and discovery of different social groups and different cultures. We can help develop an appreciation for these other cultures and these other perspectives. And we can expose these students to a wide range of knowledge while also exploring their own culture. These are our questions, which I'll include in the discussion board. And this is our reference, and thank y'all for watching.